The woman caught in adultery is found only in the Gospel of John. She is forced to encounter Jesus. She comes onto the scene as a condemned woman. We know nothing about her background other than that she has been brought to Jesus immediately after being caught in the act of adultery. Under the Mosaic law, which all of the Jews were to adhere to, this act of adultery carried the death penalty. The woman is brought to Jesus by the scribes and the Pharisees, two of the religious leader groups. They brought the woman, the Bible says, specifically to test Jesus, hoping that he would say the wrong thing so that they could accuse him. They've already decided that Jesus is a problem that they've got to get rid of. They're just trying to find out what's the best way to do it. When they asked Jesus what to do about the woman, they put him in a dilemma. If Jesus says the woman is guilty according to the law and that she should be stoned, this means that Jesus is going against the Roman law, and the Romans were in control of Israel at this time. In fact, since they lost the promised land way back in the Old Testament, the Jews have been under the control of Gentiles. Today, 2026, they are still technically under the control of Gentiles, and they will be under Gentile control until they accept their king. And so in Jesus' day, they are under Rome, and the Roman law says the Jews can keep their Jewish society and their Jewish temple and their Jewish laws, but they cannot execute a person. They cannot pass judgment on a capital offense that would require death. And so they bring this woman who is obviously worthy of death according to the law of Moses, and they ask Jesus, is she worthy of death according to the law of Moses? If he says yes, they are going back to Rome, and they're going to say that Jesus is a traitor to Rome, and he is a rabble-rouser, and he's causing problems, and Rome needs to get rid of him. If Jesus says no, we need to obey what Rome says because they're in control, then they go to the people and they say, look at this so-called Messiah. He can't be the Messiah because he doesn't support the law of Moses, which commands the death penalty. So Jesus is in a dilemma. Whatever he answers, it seems like he can't come up with the answer that would please them. And so that's the position they put him in, and that's what Jesus has to deal with. And it's in public, and there's many people there in the temple on this day. They purposely set up this encounter. The woman had no choice. We don't know if she knew about Jesus or not, but here she meets Jesus, and it's not part of her choosing. All right, so Jesus is going to rise above the scribes and Pharisees and come with the most righteous answer that he could have given. And of course, like many other times, they are stunned. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. Once again, Jesus has run circles around them, and their plan is deflated and it falls apart, and they have to retreat and try again on another day because they couldn't get Jesus on this day. All right, let's see what happens. Now, before we get into this encounter, let me just tell you that there is a little bit of a problem with this story in the Gospels. And depending on which translation you use, you might find this in different places. Here's the reason why. This story is not in the earliest and best Greek manuscripts. This story is not in the Gospel of John. That's very interesting. But as time goes on, around the 380 to 420 era, we find that this story starts cropping up in early handwritten copies of the New Testament. So it wasn't in the oldest original copies that we have. We don't have everything. We have about 5,800 pieces and parts of the New Testament, copies of the New Testament, or some books. And so then this story started creeping in, and it was in different places in several of the Gospels. It appears, though, in the 5th century, in this thing called Codex Bezae. The Codex is an entire book which would have contained all the books of the New Testament. So this is a complete bound book copy of the New Testament. And in the 400s, this story is in there, in this bound book that we have today, that's written in Greek. So that gives it a lot of early authenticity, but it doesn't have authenticity all the way back to the earliest and best. So what are we to make of this? It appears that the story was added later, but it seems to fit perfectly with the narrative of the New Testament. There's nothing outstanding of the story that would make it not fit with any of the rest of the stories in the Gospel of John or the other 3, the Synoptic Gospels. It fits with all of that. So it was a trusted story in the early church. It's not included in John's original, probably, but it was added later. And when it was added, it shows up in various regions. So society was not as well connected back then as it is today. And if you have an ancient handwritten book that pops up in multiple places that are separated by great distances, it gives more validity to that story being in those copies of manuscripts. And so sometimes it's placed in John, sometimes it's placed in Luke, and that's the background for the story. So I wanted to give you that to you so that nobody surprised you with it one day and you said, oh, I've never heard that. So there, you just heard it. But let's go to John chapter 8 and read it. You ready, Jackie? Mm-hmm. All right. One more thing I need to tell you. I said that this is only in the Gospel of John. One of the main things that John does from almost beginning to end is he highlights the conflict between the Jews. He calls them the Jews. And that phrase represents the Jewish religious leaders. It doesn't mean the population of Jews. He calls them the Jews throughout his book, and he's talking about the Jewish religious leaders, which would be scribes, Pharisees, lawyers, Sadducees, those super religious groups that were very concerned with keeping the law and keeping pure and keeping holy and keeping a lot of rules. They actually made extra rules to make sure they didn't violate the law of Moses. So this is one of those places in the book of John where we've got a conflict, and it's between Jesus and these influential Jewish leaders. All right, ready, Jackie? Here we go.
At dawn, Jesus went to the temple again, and all the people were coming to him. He sat down and began to teach them.
So this would be out in the outer court of the temple. It's within the outer wall, but it's in a public area that all Jews and women could go into. It was more of a public area. Now, Gentiles couldn't go, but any Jewish person, male or female, could go into the outer court. And that's where they were. And it's a public, big public place. And Jesus sat down and was teaching there. And then the crowd gathered around.
Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, making her stand in the center.
All right. They're obviously trying to make a public statement and a commotion. And this woman is brought here against her will, and it's embarrassing. And it gets even worse.
Teacher, they said to him, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?
All right. So I've already kind of talked about this, but in the act, she was in some kind of state of undress. You know, let's say it plainly. I guess they gave her a blanket when they brought her to Jesus, but we don't even know if she had any clothes on when they brought her in there. We don't know. We don't know what her condition was. But they were trying to be shocking, and it was Shocking. They did this on purpose. They wanted to give Jesus a hardball question, not something he could easily get out. I mean, they're trying to trap him to eliminate him. So they plainly say, the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women, but what do you say? Do you agree with Moses? Are you a good Jew, Jesus? Or are you going to be a good citizen and obey Rome? Because if you go against Rome, we're going to let them know that you are subverting the Roman authorities by passing a judgment that they will not allow us to execute this woman. So here's a flashback all the way back to Deuteronomy 22. Let's read this, Jackie.
If a man is found sleeping with a married woman, then both of them shall die. The man who slept with the woman and the woman. So you shall eliminate the evil from Israel.
All right, adultery is a capital offense for both the man and the woman. It's pronounced here in Deuteronomy 22. It's also restated in Leviticus chapter 20. The death sentence is to be carried out by stoning. We don't have time to read it all tonight, but it's prescribed in Deuteronomy 17, the prescription or the formula for stoning. Leviticus and Deuteronomy both talk about that. All right, let's keep going.
At dawn, he went to the temple again.
Oh, we've already read this. I'm just bringing you back from the flashback. Whew, we flashed back. Now we're flashing forward. Now we're back in the New Testament. Now we're proceeding here.
They asked this trap to him in order that they might have evidence to accuse him.
All right. John loves to editorialize, and he seems to know what people are thinking and why people are saying and doing what they're doing. And somehow John here happens to know, like he seems to know in a lot of places, what people are thinking and why they're saying and doing the things that they're saying and doing. And he tells us right here, they're trying to trap Jesus and put him in an impossible situation.
Jesus stooped down and started writing on the ground with his finger.
Okay, this is inexplicable. We have no way of knowing what he wrote. The important thing is, if it was important, we would know. And I'm sorry I can't satisfy your curiosity, but as a teacher, I can't speculate on things like that. So who knows what he wrote, but we all are interested in it. But look at this. He stoops down. Some of the translations say he lowered himself. Jesus lowered himself. How low? To the ground. Wow. He put himself down on her level. Don't know what he wrote. Don't know if it was for her. You think Jesus can write upside down like that? Oh, I bet he could. He could have made the letters upside down. Jesus knew everything. He could have written something there upside down where she could read it. I'm just being silly. But whatever he wrote, it might have been for her. It's hard to think that it was for the men around. They would have to get really up close to read. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say he wrote their sins or he wrote their girlfriend's names or something like that. You know, those men, some of them may have girlfriends, you know. He may have wrote their name. We don't know, but the men would have to have access to see what he's writing for that to be even meaningful to them. We just don't know what he wrote, but it's so curious. And then what happened?
When they persisted in questioning him, he stood up and said to them, "The one without sin among you should be the first to throw a stone at her."
All right, so now Jesus is taking the law and he's expanding it. Moses never said the one without sin should be the first to throw a stone. So Jesus, kind of like the Pharisees and scribes do, they add it to the law to make it a little more stringent, to make sure they didn't accidentally break the law. Here, Jesus is elevating the law and making it a little more stringent and saying, yes, I've made my decision. Jesus did not fail to pass judgment on this woman. He passed judgment on her, and he said she should be stoned. Moses said she should be stoned. Jesus said she should be stoned, but here's how it should happen. Whoever is here today that doesn't have sin, let that one start it out. It didn't even say only the sinless can throw stones. He just said the first stone should be thrown by the sinless person that's here. I'll just say that again so you can think about it. The first stone should be thrown by the person here that's sinless. You know who the person that's there that's sinless is, right?
Nobody.
Jesus. He's the only one that can throw the first stone according to his own rule. He said, let's stone her. First man up is the sinless man. And nobody took him up on it. Nobody wanted to step up and say, I'll go ahead and start it, and then y'all. They only needed one sinless man to start it. After the first rock, everybody could pile on. Jesus gave them permission. And then he stooped down again, and he went back to that writing, whatever it was. We don't know. May have been writing to her. All right. So what's going to happen, Jackie?
When they heard this, they left one by one, starting with the older men. Only he was left with the woman in the center.
I don't know why the older men left first, unless they had a lifetime of sin that they had to think about, and maybe the young men, they hadn't accumulated that much sin. I don't know. We don't know. It's just conjecture. But everybody left while Jesus apparently had lowered himself down to her level again. Whatever the writing was, we don't know. But then he raised himself back up, the Bible says. He lowered himself, and then he raised himself back up. And everybody's gone, but the woman caught in adultery and the man that was without sin. When Jesus stood up,
he said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, Lord," she answered. "Neither do I condemn you," said Jesus. "Go, and from now on do not sin anymore."
Wow. There was a lot of condemners there. And Jesus said, "Has no one condemned you?" And she forgot about him by now, I guess. Or she could have said, "They were condemning me, but they're gone now." She said, "No one. There's nobody here to condemn me." And Jesus said, "You're right, because I don't condemn you either." And he didn't say, "I know you've not sinned." He said, "I know you've sinned, but go and start over. Go and start over today. No more sin." Now, do you think she could live? How long do you think she could go without sinning? Hopefully she didn't go back to her adultery, right? But she's going to sin again one day. Hopefully not adultery. Hopefully something, a lot less impactful than adultery. But Jesus said, knowing that she would probably sin again, he said, just stop it. Just stop it and just go on. Go on from here. I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. All right. So in our two encounters tonight, Jesus forgives sins of both of these bad girls. He doesn't treat them like bad girls. He doesn't call them bad girls, but the religious people called them bad girls. Jesus does. He doesn't minimize their sin or their importance, but he forgives and he gives them value and he sends them on their way to start over. So God bless you. That's our lesson tonight on Jesus encounters the sinful woman and the woman caught in adultery.